Hey guys, welcome to True Crime Myths, Legends, and More podcast. For those of you that have been here for a while, you know what we're all about. For those of you that are just joining us, because we are super excited to be part of Podcast-thon this year. This is their third year of doing this. Really cool program. There's over 1,000 podcasts that are getting together to do this whole initiative. Each one got to select a charity that they wanted to highlight in their episode and giving them a little bit more visibility and getting out there and helping out. We chose the Cold Case Foundation, which has always been near and dear to my heart. And they were started by John Douglas. They help out with all kinds of cold case things and police departments and victim advocacy groups. And so really great organization for those of you that really love true crime and want to get in there and help out and help some of these cases. They just recently, I think in the last year, helped close a case that was like 40 or 50 years old. And so they are out there actively doing really great work, and they need your support. So check it out. Check out the Cold Case Foundation. And we're super excited for this episode because I got an incredible guest on with us. And many of you will know his work. You've seen him in documentaries and all over the place. Just an incredible guy. I have been fortunate enough to talk to him several times before now. And from the great north up in Canada, we have Dr. Peter Vronsky with us. And he has written many books and really been one of the main people that has chronicled serial killers in America. And then even as one of the taglines to his book, From the Stone Age to the Present, and, you know, has done some great work. He also is the one that really got close to Richard Cottingham, got him to confess a lot of things. And I'm sure that we will talk a little bit about that. And if you haven't seen the documentary, it came out, I guess now almost 2 years ago, but it's on Hulu right now called The Torso Killer Confessions. You should check that out. There's some good stuff on there. But without further ado, we will bring on Dr. Vronsky. Maybe. There we go. Hey.
Hi, Jeff. How you doing? Nice to have me on. Thank you.
Absolutely, man. It's good to have you. It's about time we get to, I guess, sort of talk face to face. I was just at a gaming convention a little over a week ago, and I was hanging out with a guy named Alan, and he is from right there, right from where you're at, close to Toronto. He is a publisher up there of a bunch of different board games, and really great guy. We ended up going out. And we ended up eating mussels and pommes frites, and it was delicious. How are you doing?
This is board game territory here. I mean, this is where Trivial Pursuit was invented.
Oh, wow. Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, in Toronto was a group of journalists that used to meet and think up the questions for Trivial Pursuit, and each one of them is like a multi-billionaire now.
Wow, that's wild. So what's really funny about that is my ex-wife loves Trivial Pursuit. It was her favorite game. We would play it all the time. I am terrible at Trivial Pursuit. I am not a general knowledge guy. I always hated the game. And I was really good if we played Star Wars Trivial Pursuit. I always won that one. I know a little bit about Star Wars.
Troopers.
I know if there was a serial killer one, I would ace that one too. But not so good at general knowledge when they ask you about, you know, what television program was the top of the charts in 1956. Right. I have no idea. I'm terrible. But it is, that is one of those games that everybody knows. Lots of people love it.
Yeah.
We have a company here. I'm in Cincinnati, and there's a company here called Late for the Sky. And what they do is they make custom Monopoly games. So they're the ones that put together like Cincinnati-opoly, and they
Cool.
do, yeah, they do all the custom ones. You can go there, like you can go on their website and you can create your own Monopoly game for like maybe you want to do it for a family
Oh,
gift or
wow.
something like that. Yeah, they're a pretty
Really?
neat company. I tried to talk them into producing some of my stuff, and they were like, we literally only do the Monopoly board and the box. We don't even have the equipment to do cards. And I
Uh,
was like, I didn't realize that that was a thing
yeah,
until I got into the industry a little bit more. And
yeah.
I understood like there are certain pieces of equipment that you need for specific uses. I didn't
Right.
realize that not everybody has that.
Geez, that's a concept. Crime scene monopoly.
Yeah. Dude, I actually had a friend of mine. It used to be up on my wall behind me, but she made me a a Monopoly board for Killers the card game. So I actually have one here. She took a bunch of the killers and put them on there. Good friend of mine, Hannah, that did that as I think it was a birthday gift to me. And I was like, dude, that's super cool, man. I was excited that she put it together. Uh, I can actually, it's behind my chair. I can see it there. But so, man, you have been doing stuff for years. I know that not that long ago, you would release some new stuff that was coming out. I know that you're involved in all kinds of stuff that you can't even talk about because it's not released yet. And but you have been, at least for me, uh, there are probably 4 true crime authors that I'm like, yeah, those people are like the apex, and you were one of them.
Well, thank you.
And in that very short list, we've got Catherine Ramsland, who I also know. Harold Schechter is another big author. Yourself, and then maybe we can go to maybe Anne Rule, since she's put out a bunch of books. But those are like the big names out
Yeah,
there.
that's good company to be in. Catherine Ramsden is a good colleague of mine, and Harold Schechter. Before I started writing, he was like a god to me, especially when you're writing historical stuff. I mean, I describe him as a true crime historian,
Yeah.
essentially, the way I describe myself. And he and Colin Wilson are probably the 2 most influential authors. For me, I looked at their stuff, and when I started, when I was going to take a crack at writing a book, can you do it? Can you get it published? I wanted to write something the way Colin Wilson and Schechter were writing. Schechter on very individual cases, but Colin Wilson's Criminal History of Mankind. When I read that, and I'm a historian. I'm not technically a serial killer expert. I'm a historian, and my field is another kind of serial crime, espionage. So
Mm.
my PhD is in the history of espionage, counter espionage, but espionage, the kind that's committed by spies who betray their own country. Um, it's a serial crime, and they have very similar psychopathologies to serial killers. So when I was looking for something to write that could pay my bills, that was the whole point of it. I read Criminal History of Mankind, and I said, "Damn, somebody should write one like this just for serial killers." And it worked. I'm glad Colin Wilson read the book and endorsed my second book. He gave me a blurb,
That's awesome.
because that's a great figure in not just about serial homicide, but he wrote about everything, occult things and astrology, and he was a novelist. So, and
Oh,
Harold Schechter, I met a few years ago. We had dinner, so that's my 2 idols. I at least was in touch with them.
I know. I know. For me, I when I started writing, and I put out Beyond the Headlines. One of the people that ended up getting it to proofread it was Kevin Sullivan. And Kevin is, of course, one of the top Bundy experts out there in the world. The guy is, knows everybody, has gone through all the court documents hundreds of times. And so having him proofread my chapter on Bundy, I thought, Lord, how much stuff am I going to get? Like, how much did I get wrong? And it was a very short list he sent me back and very, very minor details that, I had added in there that maybe were not reported correctly, but he had the original court documents. So he could say for sure, like, hey, when Bundy was in Colorado, he actually only had one map. He had a couple other pamphlets, but it was only one map. He had only circled things on that singular map. And I think in the phrase that I said, I think I mentioned that he had two maps. And so very, very small details, but stuff that, unless you actually had the court documents and could see the different addendums and things, the exhibits and stuff that were added to that, you would never know that. So so it was really,
and they're
really
very
cool.
difficult to get. You think that court records, oh my God, it's a murder case. Those court records are going to be there forever. But you go try to get trial transcripts. Aside from the cost, usually what you hear is, there was a flood. They're all destroyed. I couldn't get for Richard Cottingham. I could not get the court transcripts from the New York trials. The only option I had was they said, well, we have the original shorthand notes in Albany, in the archives in Albany, and we can transcribe them for you for $40 a page. And it's like 3,000 pages, $40 a page. The typed ones that are typed up, gone, lost. No archive has them. And if it wasn't for Cottingham himself, he had them in his cell. So he just gave them to me from his print, from his discovery material that he had. He turned over something like 20,000 pages of material. He was confined in a two-man cell, but they wouldn't put anybody in with him because he threatened, you put somebody into my cell, you're going to pick up their head from the next morning. So he had in his cell, he had his transcripts and all his letters that he started giving to Jennifer Weiss and I. And when we put them all together, it was about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, with tunnels eaten through it by mice. But the material was there. There was inaccessible otherwise. And so if you can get original transcripts, you're in amazing territory.
And you would think that the way that we've gone with everything now being digital, that it would be simple to digitize all of this stuff and to send it out. But that's just, this is government we're talking about.
That's right.
And the government is often way back in the Stone Age with how they do things. We just found out here in the States, of course, with all this craziness going on right now, we found out that they actually keep the retirement paperwork in a salt mine somewhere where somebody actually has to go down and retrieve the paperwork for every government employee when they retire. Who the hell came up with that? How is that an effective way to do things now in 2025? Didn't you think that
it's a horror story? It's a horror story, especially when we're dealing with just the anti digital era of the late 1970s, early 1980s, when you had the highest homicide rates in the United States. Those records were all on paper and they never got digitized. So you have, for example, thousands of cold cases in New York City alone, where I'm working, and half of them are lost. You can't find them. We've got cases that are stalled right now simply because the cases are lost. The case files are lost. They're gone. And they were lost maybe in the last 15 years, because those case files in New York were kept at the precinct at one time. Each precinct kept their murder cases. Somewhere early 2000s, I guess with the cost of real estate in New York City, you can't keep that material anymore. You can't have the square footage to keep those cases. So they sent them off into a warehouse somewhere in New Jersey, and half of them are lost. So when I was working with detectives from the cold case squad, I would give them lists of things Cottingham is talking about, and they'd go try to find those cases, and half of them they couldn't find.
Yeah, and see, this is one of the things that I think people don't understand when you're talking about cold cases specifically. That there are detectives that are out there that are actively going and looking for this information, but so much of it is buried in some warehouse somewhere in a box that may or may not be there. That they didn't know what they had. They just kind of throw it in there. They try to categorize it as much as possible, but when you're talking thousands of boxes that are in a warehouse somewhere, it takes hours and years for people to pour through that stuff. You're talking about 1, 2, maybe 3 sheets of paper that have the pertinent information on it, and you got to dig through mountains of stuff. And we wonder why it is so hard to close these cold cases, but that's why the information is somewhere, if it's even still available. I know I was talking to Bill Dorsch about the Gacy case, and one of the things that he's been trying to get his hands on for now 40 years is Gacy's employee records, because looking into that would be able to give you, because Gacy kept meticulous records. If you could get a hold of that, you could then look and cross-reference all of the people that went missing there in the area that also had a connection with Gacy. And apparently that has not been done. And so
it wasn't done at the time of the Gacy's trial when they were investigating him. They never.
Apparently not. And the same crazy thing with when Karen Conti, she said, when I asked her about it, and she said that she had that documentation at one time. It was given to them, and they turned it over when the appeals and everything were over. They turned it back over, and it should be stored somewhere. But now nobody can find that information. So she said she saw
vital.
it.
Like something like that is, for example, I found Richard Cottingham's employee records in New Jersey, where he was originally arrested, and they hung on to an envelope of his employment records, and it led to one more case in New York City that nobody knew about until I got into the employee records, and that those survived is vital. I found old parking tickets, for crying out loud, that people never looked at back when he was arrested in 1980, but only are significant now, and they forgot. I mean, people forget what's in those files. You're talking about 40 years ago. Even the detectives who were original investigators, a lot of them have passed away. Never mind retired, they passed away. And when I opened those boxes in New Jersey, I was shocked by how much current information there were in Bergen County, and they've certainly done a better job of preserving their records than New York has. But New York literally has thousands and thousands of unsolved cases. I think there's something like 4,000 unsolved murders from the era that I'm looking at between 1960 and 1980. And where do you put 4,000 file folders? That's a lot of real estate. And you know, the price of real estate in New York, I understand why they're not keeping them anymore. They put them in a warehouse somewhere where the square footage is less expensive, but it's lost. It's lost, and I'm just watching these cases as Cottingham's getting old. You know, he's not in good health. I'm watching these cases that I know he did it. The cops know. You know, it's one of these things like we know he did it, but can we prove it?
Yeah.
You know, do we have the evidence? We know he did it.
Yeah.
But, you know, where's the evidence? We need that case file. Even to his confessing. You know, because of, you know, the whole Henry Lee Lucas syndrome, I, you know, to their credit, I have to say that every cop I've worked with Cottingham is meticulously intending to confirm with some kind of holdback anything that Cottingham has said. And so each one of those confessions he made, he gave them something that wasn't in the media, wasn't in the papers. And if you don't have the case file, forget about it. It's not going to happen. And so we got cases where Cottingham has just outright looked the cops in the face and said, I did this. But he, you know, with a geriatric memory, he can't tell them enough of, you know, without the case file that they can confirm that this actually is him. So these cases and their families are just left hanging.
Yeah.
And they don't want to, you know, solving a case, that's easy. Closing the case is the bitch, right?
Yeah,
the bureaucratic process, right? So,
well,
you know, and he claims he killed 85 to 100 women, which people kind of laughed at first when he made that claim in 2009. And then he confessed to 1, and then to 3, and then to 7 more. And when I started seeing him in 2017, the only serial killer I ever talked to in a prison, like I say, people say I'm an expert, but I'm not. I'm an expert on their history at best, but I never talked to these guys. I didn't want to. I saw all the interviews on YouTube, you know, and the questions that people ask serial killers are the same questions I would have asked, and the answers are all unsatisfactory. So what's the point of I never wanted to meet them. I wrote those 4 books without ever sitting down with a serial killer until Cottingham. And so with Cottingham, you know, 85 to 100, at first people were kind of beginning to doubt it. And so when I went to see him for the first time in 2017, he was in for 6 murders. Today, he's in for 19. And so I witnessed all that. I witnessed, not only did I participate in 10 of those 19 case closures, but I witnessed the ones that, you know, I had nothing to do with. But I witnessed it from the inside. I saw how those cold cases were closed, and there's so many that he had perpetrated that may never get closed.
Yeah.
It's
so, you know, it's interesting because you know, you talk about that, and it's interesting when I go out there, Cottingham, you know, with numbers like that, you would think that more people would know him by name. And that's not the case. Like, Cottingham is not one of the more well-known, you know, serial killers out there. You know, just like, for example, Samuel Little. Samuel Little currently, if, you know, and Cottingham could knock him out of that, but currently has killed the most people in American history, right? 93 women that we know of. We know at least 70 of those are accurate. They're still working on many cold cases related to Sam Little. And of course, Sam is now long dead. but we have a lot of evidence there that he was involved in several of those. One of them being right here in the Cincinnati area, and then another one down in, I believe, Louisville. But he traveled the country. And, it's interesting that Cottingham, most of his stuff was done in New Jersey, New York, in that area. And, we don't know that. We don't know that as well.
That's by choice, by his choice. That was his strategy. After he was convicted, there were 3 trials, 2 in New Jersey and 1 in New York. In New York, they did all 3 of his cases in one trial. Once he went away, he refused to do any interviews. He didn't appear on TV. He didn't sell any art. He didn't write letters. He just vanished completely. And it wasn't until Nadia Fitzani in 2009 convinced them to do an interview with her, because she had a physical resemblance to one of his victims. And so he wanted to meet her. And he tells her this in 2009, that he actually committed nearly 85 to 100 what he called perfect murders. And nobody heard of him. By 40 years later, right? I mean, when Cottingham went away, the word serial killer wasn't even being used. That term starts appearing 1981, 82. In fact, he's arrested. By the time he's arrested 1980, by the time his last trial takes place in 1984, he's now being called a serial killer. But during his arrest, that word doesn't appear. And consider this. Richard Cottingham is 18 hours younger than Ted Bundy. They were born 18 hours apart in 1946. Wow. And Cottingham, while Ted Bundy was still shoplifting, Cottingham had already killed 5 or 6 women. Cottingham started killing at a very young age. Statistically, he's an anomaly in one sense, and that's why we haven't heard of him in a way, because he didn't want the publicity, and he still doesn't. Getting him to talk is really like pulling teeth. And he complains every time he makes a confession that prison guards who didn't know who he was, who's the old man, with the white beard. Nobody knew who he was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. It's only after he starts confessing that other inmates and guards are now giving him the kind of attention that he didn't want. Plus his family. Cottingham, his family kept their name, and he had 3 kids and his wife that he is still emotionally very connected to his wife.
Wow.
And, he sometimes he says things to me, and he says, "But don't write that down. I don't want my wife to find out."
Wow, that's wild.
I know, that's like 50 years later. She divorced him back in 1980. Don't write that down because I don't want her to find out. So he kept quiet essentially for those reasons. He didn't want to bring the attention to his family. One of his sons is in law enforcement, and some of his kids are doing well, and he's concerned that having being connected to a serial killer may hurt them professionally, may hurt them socially. So it was mostly about his family. But go ahead.
It's interesting when we talk about that specifically, because the general public gets this idea that these killers have no feelings, have no emotions, have no connection to anybody else. But then we see people like Cottingham, who had a family, who had children, and we get this idea that is incorrect, that they don't have any attachments. Many of them do. Many of them have people that they care about, and it's a fascinating psychology to, after all of these years, with many things coming to light, all of these different cases that have happened, and we know details of many of these murders, that this guy would still be concerned after all these years about what his family thinks, about what his children think, about what that would do to them. And it's just interesting because that is counter to what we believe about many of these people.
Yes, and just the idea that they're kind of dead inside is kind of a myth. I mean, they do have feelings. Often the feelings are rage and need for vengeance and revenge, but those are emotions. Those are feelings. He has said to me straight out. He said that one thing he doesn't feel and he doesn't understand is remorse. I describe it as cognitive remorse. He knows what it is. He knows how he should behave if he had remorse, what kind of act he should perform, feeling remorse, but he doesn't actually feel it. And so he has an intellectual understanding of the damage he had done. He wants to make what's the term? I guess he wants to atone in some ways, which is why he has been confessing, but he doesn't feel it. He doesn't understand it. And so he admitted that he never felt remorse in his entire life. And he doesn't feel it now, and he doesn't know what it would feel like. I think at one point he said, maybe I feel it, but I just don't know it's remorse. I never felt it.
I think for many of those people, that simple fact is the only reason why psychologically they can handle the kinds of crimes that they commit, right? Because they have to be able to not feel that kind of remorse, because that is ultimately what most of us, what ends up getting us into depression and anxiety and feeling all of these other feelings that they never even get a chance to get to. And so this is something that that you don't know about me, and I'll tell you this now. But I have always come from this less from the academic perspective and more of the understanding, because I grew up very much like some of these people. I struggled with a lot of the same mental issues, and it's interesting because I've had to learn how to practice at those things to be normal. And many of them talk about that they don't feel this, but they understand what that's like because they watch other people feel it. And so to be good at that thing and to get what you need out of other people, you have to be very, very practiced. And so, it ends up being, at least for lack of a better term, the ones that are good at it learn those lessons very well, and they can integrate themselves with other people. It only comes out in situations where, for example, very stressful situations where they have no emotion and no affect at all, and where most people would be losing their mind. They can deal with it very calmly a lot of times. And then people look at them like, how the hell do you do that? You should be really upset right now. But they don't have that gear. And it's very helpful in a lot of situations. You see a lot of very successful people that do the same thing. And it's very helpful for them. Very different thing when you're going around hacking people's heads off and burning their bodies. Very different.
And totally, it baffles me to this day. All right, I ask him, you're cutting off, severing a human head. Did you ever look outside of yourself and say, this is crazy what I'm doing? I mean, this is something out of one of those Tales from the Crypt comic books from the 1950s. Is this for real? Have you never asked yourself that? No, no. It's like carving a turkey.
I think at
A
that
little
at that
disconnect.
at that point, like especially for Cottingham, right? Because he mainly killed prostitutes, women that
Well,
he
that's
went to
not true,
see.
actually. Actually,
Really,
yeah, from the convicted cases, only 30% were prostitutes.
really.
Yes, yeah, that's a myth. The rest of the 60% were mothers and schoolgirls and employed women, and so he wasn't really one of those guys who targeted um, sex workers. So I think it was a matter of convenience, but he's not like the Green River
Yeah.
killer where he has this thing, or I always forget the guy's name in Rochester.
Oh, that was Genesee. That was Arthur Shawcross.
Off the chart, those guys had
Yeah.
obsessions with sex workers, and
Yeah.
Cottingham, he did have also an element of obsession with them. But you know, the thing with Cottingham is so many women survived him. There were 4 survivors that testified at his trials. That's very rare for a serial killer. And
Yeah.
so he tells me that he killed maybe only 1 in 100. The rest he let go. And so in my time, I found 3 women who nobody knew about who had survived Cottingham, were abducted by him, but walked away alive.
Wow.
Yeah, and so he, at one point, he kind of explained it to me a little bit. He said, killing doesn't make you God. Knowing who lives or dies does that. And
Interesting.
and so I realized at that point that if he killed them all, then he's not God. He's got to let some of them live to be God. And so the majority of women that he had abducted survived. So there's probably over 1,000 women that never reported this or reported it and it was lost. I found 2 women, for example, going through Cottingham's employment records because one of them stabbed Cottingham, and he told me, he says, I was a victim sometimes. So, oh yeah, Rich, tell me about that. Right? So he
Yeah.
tells me how he picked up this one woman and she stabbed him, and and then his leg became infected, and he couldn't go to work. And so I got into the employment records, and except the problem was he couldn't remember, or he wouldn't tell me when that was or where. Right. So in the employment record, I find that indeed he is asking for sick pay for a week, and there's a doctor's note with a date on it because there's an abscess wound in his thigh. All right. And
Wow.
and so when I search the date, I come up with a double abduction. Not one woman, but 2 women who are abducted 1 block away from his mother-in-law's house in Queens, and she stabs him in the leg. All right. It's in the newspaper reports.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the case, right? With the date. And that was in the employment records. And had those employment records not survived, and were, like I said, they were kept in New Jersey, that New York case would have never been identified.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then it, and this is stuff that is very difficult to find out. But like you wonder then, what is it for him that triggered that event? When did he make the decision? Okay, I've abducted these people. This one I'm going to let go. This one is not going to go. And like, what is that mental process for him? Uh, just how do you make that determination?
Yeah, he told me that often he didn't have a kind of a list of criteria whether she lives or dies. It was very spontaneous. One thing is whether she's going to be a risk to him. Now, in some ways, I think this is him, oh, I had to kill them, otherwise I would have gone to prison, kind of trying to justify what he was doing. But on another level, I think that it also was part of the process that so many women walked away from him and never reported it, and so many rapes are unreported, because that's what that's what it is now. It's a serial rape victim. They're not a murder victim here. And how many rapes are unreported, especially in the 1960s and 1970s? People just don't want to get into it. It happened, it's done, and women take this for the rest of their lives, and it becomes this hidden trauma, this thing that some talk about, some never will. But so that's one issue, was whether his victim, if he caught her lying. And so, for example, there was one girl who claimed to be a vegetarian, and then several hours later, they went to have something to eat, and she ordered a cheeseburger. She had to die. All right, that was. I'm not going to trust her. Another victim, he told me, he really was thinking of letting her go. He liked her, and as he was driving her back to where he abducted her from, he said, I guess you're going to call the police now. And she said, no, first I'm going to have a shower, then I'm going to call the police. And he said that he killed her. After that, he said, I couldn't let her go.
Yeah.
And with just a wisecrack. Right? Just from her personality, from what I read about her in the newspapers before she was murdered, she was this wisecracking, tough young woman. She wasn't a sex worker, and he liked her. They had this kind of banter going back and forth, right? Like she was wisecracking with him, almost insulting him with these kind of jokes. And when you read some of these transcripts, sometimes, when serial killers record their victims on video, particular the Paul Bernardo and Homolka kidnappings and murders, when you read the transcripts of what is happening between the victim and their abductor, there's often a kind of almost camaraderie, it appears like. Now, partly victims are playing their abductor in the hope that they're going to be able to get that person to let them go, and it's a smart move. And it's almost like Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
But when you're reading those things, it's very benign, ordinary conversation that is taking place between a person who's going to be murdered and the murderer. There's no necessarily always threats or kind of torturous discussion, insults, or it's all very congenial, and then they end up dead. And so I was really surprised by when you look at the entire context of those conversations that Bernardo and Homolka were having with the two victims. you realize that it's not on the surface as the kind of terrible, terrifying, torturous experience we on the outside imagine. And so women walking away from that alive didn't surprise me. Once Cottingham started explaining it, but he didn't plan his murders. He didn't. He told me he doesn't fantasize. He says, I lived the fantasy. I didn't have to fantasize. I asked him, did you have fantasies? What kind of what did you? Oh, I didn't fantasize about anything. I lived the fantasy.
Interesting.
And often he didn't know where he was. One of the hardest things about identifying some of his cases was he didn't know where he was. He would just drive around at random, and then when he saw a target of opportunity, he would strike. That's why I call him the American werewolf, because essentially there is this lycanthropic aspect to him where he's got this family, he's got kids, he's got mistresses as well. I mean, he had 3 mistresses simultaneously in New York, right? I don't know when he had time to kill anybody, and he's raising 3 kids in New Jersey. And when does this guy sleep? Yeah, never mind when does he kill.
Yeah.
So and all 2 of the mistresses couldn't believe that their boyfriend was capable of all this. They all described them as a sensitive, generous, nice person.
Wow.
And that's that's kind of what comes off from him, this kind of affability, friendliness. He's a guy you could have a beer with, except for that one quirk: he likes to cut off women's heads and set their torsos on fire. Other than that, he's a normal guy. And his family background is atypical for serial killers. I mean, his I don't want to say, middle classes don't produce serial killers. They do. But he comes from a middle class nuclear family, 3 younger sisters who adored him. The family is intact. The dad was, vice president at MetLife Insurance. The mother was a stay-at-home mom. They remained married right to the end. There was no familial instability, nothing. It's almost like a private joke between Cottingham and myself. I tell him, Rich, if you don't come up with something to explain yourself to me, I'm just going to say you were used as a sex object in, as an altar boy. The priests used to abuse you. All right. Do you want that in the book? Give me something better. He's got nothing. He's got nothing. The only thing I found was he had a serious head injury when he was 4 years old. Serious enough that it was reported in the newspapers.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a frontal lobe injury. He walked into a moving car as a 4-year-old. He ran out. He told me it was family lore that Rich hit a car. A boy hits car. And so when I started looking in newspaper files, I found the headline, Boy Hits Car, 4-year-old Richard Cottingham taken to a hospital with severe head injuries after walking into a moving car. And so that's the only explanation I have.
Wow. And so he started, you said what? He started young.
He started very young. The first confirmed case is 1967 when he's 20 years old.
Okay.
And, you tell me what Ted Bundy was doing in 1967. Nothing,
Well,
so as far as we know, ask Kevin, right? So we suspect, but nothing confirmed. Now, so we know he killed Nancy Vogel. And now we know, actually a little earlier, January of 67, Marianne de la Sala. So he's 20. That's much younger than the statistical 27, 28 when they usually commit their first. Now, that's what we know, what's confirmed. I believe, and he admitted it, that he killed his first victim when he was 16 and a half.
Wow.
Yeah, when he was still a junior in high school in the summer. And I had the family working on this. We know the case. The family has corresponded with Cottingham. The jurisdiction doesn't even want to look into it. This is like 1963. Are you kidding us? This is too cold for us.
Yeah, they don't want to rip open that old wound.
But the family does, and they keep telling the family, well, we don't talk about active cases, but it's not active. I know it's not active. That's the biggest bullshit you hear often from police when the family gets in touch about their loved one. The police response often is, well, we don't talk about active cases. This case, we don't talk about unsolved cases. And I know from Cottingham, those cases are not being investigated because nobody's coming down to see him, but they tell the family. I've got 3 or 4 families right now who are being told by police, oh, we're looking into it, we're investigating, right? But we can't tell you anything. But I'm talking to Cottingham. He tells me every cop that comes to visit him. I know which cases are active. There's about 5, 6 active murder cases in 4 different jurisdictions right now, where police officers are visiting Cottingham and interviewing him about these specific cases. There's another 16 that he has claimed, and he has contacted some of the families and told them that, essentially told them that I want to talk to police about your family member. And none of the cops are going to see him. That's all I'm advocating for is go do the interview. Lisa Thomas, Rockland County. He confessed to that murder in writing in 2022. The detectives who are in charge of that case, right, will not go interview Cottingham. And moreover, they lied. They told the district attorney in Rockland County that Cottingham has refused to see them. Outright lie. I don't understand. Well, the thing is I don't understand why. Why don't you just go see him and see him? See what it is. That's all I'm advocating. I can't tell them, Cottingham did this or Cottingham didn't. What I have is probable cause. This was released on television. Mary Murphy on WPIX News 11 actually ran on television the written confession to killing Lisa Thomas that Cottingham sent, and no one will go see him in Clarkstown PD, right? Will go see him and ask him about it. Take the Lisa Thomas case, and this is a 1974 case. Take the Lisa Thomas file and go talk to him, right? They won't do it.
I think the problem with a lot of that has become that, until recently, and, we're talking in the 70s and, even before that, the 60s, 70s, 80s, there is this kind of good old boys club with the police departments. And, this is a time where they're very much protecting their own. And a lot of these cases, there may have been things that were not done the way that they were supposed to be done. Some things that were glossed over, some investigations that never happened, people that weren't talked to. And you now have these cops that have gone on to do other things. Maybe they moved up the chain. Maybe they hung their hat on a different trial. And now this is going to be something that is going to cause problems with their legacy. and they don't want these cases reopened. They don't want them looked at because it may great granddaddy may not be looked upon so well because maybe something comes out that was not shining on their.
That is definitely a possibility. It still baffles me because your great grandfather, your granddad, has long passed away. You can set things right. It's not the current department's fault anymore.
Yeah.
All those people are gone. Anybody who bungled it back in the 1970s, they're gone. So you guys can fix this. You guys can actually undo the past. You guys can fix this, and it baffles me if that's the motive. I thought of what you just described. I thought of that. It just still baffles me that would be an issue. Like what your ancestors did.
Like I've talked to Bill Dorsch and I've talked to Bob Motta, about the Gacy case specifically, and there is a huge push that there is the possibility of many other bodies. Many other people that went missing at that time that he may have been involved with, and the fact that there may have been one or two accomplices along with Gacy that was doing these things, and the unwillingness of the police department in Chicago to do anything about it, to go and look at this stuff is unbelievable. The ground penetrating radar stuff that they did, where they went in the little tent and they looked at the one place that the guy with the ground penetrating radar said, hey, there's nothing in that spot. Don't bother looking there. But there's 13 other anomalies in the ground here. I've been to that location. I've seen the apartments there that he used to manage. And I've been there. Actually, I did a video for Bill from the door of where he lived to a half a block away to the apartments there that Gacy managed, where they found all the anomalies in the ground. I've been on the property. I know how close he was to there, and that I'm sure that he saw all that when they were digging the trenches out front at 3:00 in the morning. So it's just unbelievable to me that for whatever reason, especially with these bigger cases that are going to like bust open all of this stuff that are more famous, that they just do not want to get any egg on their face at all. They don't want to be, and it's, why? Like the families are begging to get some resolution.
Yes.
And they're the ones that are important in all of this. Giving them that peace of mind to know what happened 30, 40, 50 years ago to my loved one should be much more important than, hey, somebody didn't investigate something, or they didn't look at this, or maybe they swept this under the rug because they couldn't figure it out or whatever.
And in cases from that generation, from the Cottingham, John Wayne Gacy generation, we could have an open excuse slip for any police department. Hey guys, you didn't have DNA back then. We get it. Yeah. It's not even that you bungled it. You just didn't have the tools. You didn't have the tools that you have now. But you can fix it now. Fix it. Right? We got one DNA hit with Cottingham, one of the cases, and it was DNA that was accidentally preserved from 1968. And
wow.
and it didn't show up in CODIS. They could have solved that case a long time ago, but there was also we think CODIS is you just type something into CODIS and send them, mail in the DNA and comes back. It doesn't work that way, right? And so even though Cottingham's DNA was taken way back in late 1990s, it wasn't entered into CODIS. They had the DNA, but they didn't enter it into CODIS. That was a bureaucratic process as well. It's easy to take DNA, not that easy to process it, catalog it, and then enter it into the database. That's manpower, right?
Yeah.
So when they I read in papers, right? Cottingham described this case to me. He actually took me on Google Maps. We sat on the phone. He brought me back to his mother-in-law's house, where he left bodies all over there. That was one of his anchors. And he says, okay, drive left, turn right. What do you see? And so I'm on Google Maps, right, taking his driving directions. And so he sent me down to the location where he left this woman in a car in a mall. He wanted to know whether it was in Queens or Nassau County. And the mall was just across the border into Nassau County on the Sunrise Highway. So when I started looking at what happened at that mall, I discovered in 1968 they found a woman in her car in that mall. Then I read somewhere around 2005, 2007, they cleared a suspect in that case using DNA.
Wow.
Now, my God, you guys got DNA? Right? So here's where I got to give credit to that county. When I got in touch with them about this case, the cops were totally open, and the district attorney. Come down, see us. I went down. We had a long conversation. Why I think, and why how Cottingham led me to that case. They pulled the DNA. They ran it. It was a match to Cottingham.
Wow.
And so out of that, we had 5 case closures because this was the first time Cottingham was indicted since the 1980s. They indicted him on the DNA, and he 5 cases altogether. He confessed to another 4 cases there, and I know he murdered about 10 women there, except they couldn't find the case files in Nassau County for some of them. Others were never declared as murders. There's 2 women that he murdered that the ME just concluded it could be accident. We have no cause of death, right? Yeah. And so there's no files on them. By now they're gone. They were these were murders in the 1970s, and so they couldn't close the other ones, but they closed 5 were closed out of that 1 DNA hit.
So there's 2 different things that I'm thinking right now. One, you mentioned much earlier that, parking tickets and stuff. So you're, talking about DNA, and we know that because some of these cases are so old that they didn't preserve that stuff. No. So there's no way to now go back and get that DNA unless somebody had the forethought to preserve it. And a lot of times they had no idea because there was no process for that. So it just kind of got thrown in a bag, thrown in a locker somewhere, and there was no preservation on those materials, whether it's blood or semen or whatever. So there's no way to go back and get that now. So it becomes vitally important in these cases, parking tickets, violations and stuff that come through that place people at the scene. Because also back then, you didn't have cell phone towers. You didn't have cell phone records that we have now that we can go and we can place people.
Or surveillance video. Those 3 things, DNA, cell phone records, and ubiquitous surveillance video everywhere. Right? I mean, you're on video before you commit the crime. If you're a perpetrator,
absolutely.
Let's say you're a bank robber, right? And you walk by 5 banks. Right, yep. You're on video, and then you decide later you're going to rob one of the banks. Too late. You're already on the video.
Yep. Well, I tell people all the time, if you're going to go and murder somebody and you go into Walmart to buy the rope and the duct tape and everything, they have you on camera. They have your receipts already. They know.
That's right.
And if they find a body within 30 miles wrapped in this duct tape and with this rope, they know who did it, right?
Right. Even if you paid in cash.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So Yeah, but I think back then those documents that they have to dig out become really, really important
Yeah,
to
and where are you
place
going to
these
find
people.
parking tickets? Like, who kept
Yeah.
the parking tickets? Like, forget about it. Yeah, dream
So
on. You know.
the other thing that I was thinking is also escaping me now. Son of a bitch. It was a good one too.
We're talking about the
Uh
DNA hit that we got in Nassau
oh,
County.
so like oh well, I kind of already mentioned that. But yeah, it's amazing that you've been able to put some of that stuff together, that there was that information available there. And Cottingham, it seems as he gets older, he's becoming more and more forthright with some of those things and able to have conversations. But like you said, uh, you know his mind is not as good as it used to be, and keeping all those details straight is difficult because he
Yeah.
often didn't know.
He didn't collect souvenirs. I mean, that's a myth that he had a trophy room. That's absolute nonsense. It wasn't his trophy room. It was a place that his wife was suing him for divorce in the last year. And so they had a spare room in the basement. He moved all his precious stuff into that room, and there was all this women's clothing was found there. It's from one of his mistresses who left him, and she left all her stuff in the apartment. In fact, everybody thought he had murdered her until they found her alive in 2004. They found her alive, and they got her testimony back then. But she just ran away from him, and left all her clothes, all her stuff,
Wow.
and he brought it home. He brought it home and locked it in his room. All right, figuring that she may come back and whatever. So he just brought her stuff home. So that's the women's clothing. They found a couple of pieces of jewelry in his car, which he hadn't disposed of. But there was no lists. There were no newspaper clippings. None of the stuff matched up to any victim other than the most recent ones that he had committed just before he was arrested. So he says that he never looked up in the newspapers the next day about the case. He never followed the cases. Once they happened, and he just moved on. So that's a problem today because he doesn't know the names of the victims. All the victims, the way they were put together often was they would have a resemblance to actresses on TV that he watches. So this looks
Interesting.
like Sheila Appleby, or she looked like this actress and that actress, and so what they did in Bergen County, they did these photo lineups of various victims that looked like the actress he had described, and he would pick the actual victim out of the lineup. Oh, there she is. That's the one. Um,
Interesting.
yeah. But otherwise, so he had a vague recollection of the one thing he would remember is the crime scene, not its location, but the terrain. Because he said he was very careful when he was, as she would put it, dropping them off. Never says I dumped the body. It's I dropped her off. Right. At first, I thought just like you drop your kids off at school, right? You drop your date off at home. Then I realized he's talking about dropping a body, right? So
Yeah.
I dropped her off somewhere by the side of the road. He remembers the condition, the terrain, but he doesn't know where it is.
Hmm.
And so part of my challenge was finding that terrain that he described, where exactly, and trying to match it to an actual case. And that's where I started, teaching myself geographic profiling, because it works actually,
Yeah.
and I began to see these patterns of victims' bodies being found around where his uncles used to live in Massapequa in Long Island, where his mother-in-law lived, and where he used to date his future wife. right? Around where he worked, where he served in the National Guard, all these familiar places, there were dead women showing up there. And
Mm.
and then when I started looking at the dead women, I began to see certain signatures that he would leave. Like, for example, a lot of his victims are found with their shoes missing.
Hmm.
And to the point that at one point I started doing a search on newspaper databases, victim found shoes missing. And out of that search, I found 2 or 3 cases that were linked to him. Just on that, right?
Wow.
And so the mystery was for a long time, like, shoes missing. Is this a fetish? What is this? Right? That no shoes found, no female shoes found when he was arrested. Right? And so, ask the artist. What's with the shoes, Rich? Where are the shoes? Oh, I didn't want them kicking me. So I would have them remove their shoes, or I would take their shoes off.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so, not. It's not unusual to find a victim with their shoes off, but completely missing. Where like what that's a little bit more rare. So as I began to look at certain murders around New York and New Jersey, where it's a female victim, she's strangled, right, or she's smothered, but they can't find her shoes. I began to look at Cottingham a little bit closer. And like I said, it led to a number of cases, but the explanation was very simple, right? Unless you ask the perpetrator, because people wondered about that. Is this some kind of psychopathological thing, or is this a strategic thing? So it turned out to be a strategic decision. But
it seems like a lot of what he did, and this is what I was going to say before. It seems like a lot of what he did was really evasion techniques. Like he didn't keep things. He didn't
yes,
do newspaper clippings
yes,
because he was trying to evade the police and make sure that he could continue doing what he was doing. It's
absolutely.
interesting.
Absolutely, absolutely. He was very forensically aware, and he had a strategy. A lot of his victims he took across county lines, and there's a couple of FBI cases where he took them across state lines, dropped them in different states. There's one where he cut up a woman and left pieces of her in one state and the other pieces in another state. And he always would switch things up. He drowned some of his victims, he suffocated some, he strangled some, he stabbed some, he cut their throats, and he says that he shot at least one victim. So there's absolutely and in those days, of course, but when nobody connected any of those cases at that time. And cops would look, right, in those days. Oh, this victim was found outdoors. This victim was found indoors. Different perpetrator.
Yeah.
This one was stabbed, but this one was strangled. Different perpetrator. Right. So there were something like 13 unsolved murders in Bergen County of young women, which most of them he had perpetrated.
Wow.
Not to say. Also, here's another issue for me. I've had cases where I was sure it was Cottingham, and it turned out it wasn't. Because Rodney Alcala, the dating game killer, worked in the same office with Richard Cottingham in New York.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. I didn't know that.
I know. And then Cottingham was moved to a different office later, like not Cottingham, but the entire Blue Cross moved to a different office. Alcala, 10 years later, kills a woman 3 blocks away from where Cottingham was still working.
Wow.
Right.
So
and everybody thinks it's Cottingham until the DNA came back, And it turned out that it was he was in California by then. Rodney Alcala. It was one of the cases that Wendell Stratford from the NYPD Code Case Squad worked on. But they all thought it was Cottingham. How can this not be Cottingham 3 blocks away? So you have a serial killer working in the same office in the same shift, right? And Alcala,
what are the odds?
I asked Alcala, right? He never responded. That did he know Richard Cottingham? This was when Alcala came from California as a fugitive, and was living under the name Berger, right? Taking seminars with Roman Polanski at NYU. Okay.
Wow.
So at that moment, Cottingham and Alcala were working the night shift at Blue Cross Insurance.
Wow.
Okay.
So
and Cottingham doesn't remember Alcala. It's like or a guy named Berger. I sent him pictures and don't remember him. Yeah.
Huh. So I was at a show one time, and I had a guy come up to the booth, and he asked me if Rodney was in Killers the Card Game, and I flipped there. I said, yeah, he's right there. Cottingham is as well, just so you know. But I showed it to him, and he said, yeah. He was like, that's the guy. He was like, I dated one of Rodney's victim's sister. And he said, I was actually, when the trial happened, he was like, we went to the trial together. I was there. He said he got to be pretty friendly with Acala. Acala had sent him several signed books and things like that back and forth. They had corresponded for some time. When the personal effects were released to the family, because this was Rodney's oldest victim. She worked with him. She was, I think, 35 years old. And he was driving her home one night when he decided to kill her. But he took her stuff, her purse, and threw it out the window on the side of the road. And the police had recovered that stuff and had released it to the family. And the sister had given it to him. So he still has that at his house. And he was telling me all this stuff. And he said, hey, you know who you need to talk to is the sister. And at the booth, he calls her on the phone. He still talks to her and hands me his phone. And I spent about 30 minutes on the phone with her, talking about Rodney Acala, talking about the murder of the sister. And at some point, I need to hit her up and bring her on here. I think she has a very unique perspective of that. And I think it'd be really cool to have her voice get out there. But somewhere here, I have her information. And it was just very, very unique. I have gotten to meet a bunch of people that I would have never expected that I would meet. I'll tell you a funny story about Cottingham. I was at a show one time. I was doing a haunted house show for like industry haunted house people. And my dad was with me. And at the time, my dad had a big, long white beard, long white hair. And I told people that I got Cottingham on loan from prison, and he was there to answer any of their questions. And so my dad, being the guy that he is, started telling all kinds of crazy stories at the booth. So I was hoping I had a picture of that. I was looking for it in my files. I was going to send that to you because I thought you'd get a kick out of that. But
Cottingham, when Department of Corrections would hold the Christmas party for inmate families, Cottingham was the Santa Claus.
That's not surprising.
They would dress him up in a Santa Claus suit, and the kids, he would hand out the present to the kids. And the kids, I because it's the same families that visit, you're waiting in the waiting room, and when they bring Cottingham out in the wheelchair, I hear kids who, they're Santa Claus, and he's got a nickname, Bad Santa, and the kids all believe he's the real Santa Claus because they they pulled on his beard, and it was a real beard. He's no department store Santa. He's the real thing. And I hear kids like all speculating like he was arrested for burglary, going down a fireplace somewhere. They have all these crazy stories about Cottingham, but he was visually, everybody in the visiting room, there would be, these are contact visits, so it's not like through windows. You sit in the chair and you're facing the inmate, and there's a 2-foot distance between you and the inmate with who you're visiting, and there's probably about 100 inmates at the same time who are brought out in this 2-hour family visit, and so they let first the families come in, and they're seated, and once all the families are seated, then the doors open and the inmates come out. And so Cottingham comes out the door, and he's in a wheelchair. He's with the white beard, the hair, and everybody in the visiting room like looks at, oh man, who's Santa Claus in a wheelchair, right? And so he was like physically this presence as he gets wheeled out.
I know. Speaking of something else, because you mentioned it earlier. I've got a friend of mine who is she's always on this when we do our live episodes. I bring her, Mary and Sherry on, and they do like the recap episodes, and so we talk about everything, and they get to say what they thought of the episode and everything. But Mary is from Scotland, and so she gets on there, so she's very interested in a lot of the international cases. And when I mentioned to her that you were coming on, she was like, "Oh, he did that stuff on Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka." And she was very excited, very excited about that. And so she is really interested in that. And then I saw that, of course, he just died not too long ago, but old Willie Picton, who was up there in Canada. And that's
Willie Picton died?
Yeah, he died, I want to say 6 months ago. Somebody stabbed him in the neck, and he bled out.
How did I ever miss that? Where was I? Probably.
Yeah,
I get news like that. You'd think that a guy like me would be on top of all the serial killer news, but I'm not.
Yeah. I understand it. Like everybody, people are always coming to me like, "Did you hear this?" And I'm like, "No, I had no idea."
Yeah, I had no idea that Picton is gone.
Yeah, he's gone.
That's so sad.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
I'll be crying myself to sleep tonight.
And he went in a very pleasant way, right? Another inmate killed him, and couldn't have happened to a nicer guy.
Yeah.
But and Willie, of course, got to be one of the dirtiest humans alive. On the pig farm that
pig farm thing is just it's too much. It's too Ed Gein,
Very much so. And again, when they found him, he had a very similar scene to Ed Gein. And but man, and he's another one. I don't know if anybody rivals that as far as body count in Canada.
Yeah,
he's what, 70 plus? I think 78 or something like that.
I think he's convicted on 49. He said he wanted to make it an even 50 or something. I'm not sure of the numbers. I'm bad with numbers. I can hardly remember my own phone number, let alone the serial killer's body count.
I'm usually pretty good with numbers, sadly. It's that analytical brain.
No, you don't become a historian by passing math in high school. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. So you mentioned this earlier, which I thought was really cool, and I didn't know this about you, but the whole that your degree is in the espionage stuff.
Yes.
And that, so Beyond the Headlines, my first volume is on serial killers. Volume 2 is on criminals. Volume 3 I'm working on is cults and religions. Volume 4 is assassinations, and then Volume 5 I'm going to do on conspiracy theories. All with kind of the same formula.
Yeah, come talk to me about Lee Harvey Oswald, because I did some pioneering work
I
on Lee Harvey Oswald and his KGB connections and
Yes,
CIA connections, which were none. Right?
nice.
It's not going to be a happy interview for you, because it's a conspiracy of one. You know,
Yeah.
I
So
became convinced that Lee Harvey Oswald did it exactly, more or less, the way the Warren report says. And I went
interesting.
there as a conspiracist. I grew up on that. I was 8 years old when JFK was assassinated. I was very conscious of what happened, and grew up on all that grassy knoll, second gunman, magic bullet, um, conspiracy stuff. And when I was working in Russia, 1990, I had an opportunity to, at that moment, as Russia was falling apart, they opened up everything to me in Russia that nobody got to. None of the congressional investigations, Warren Commission, the Russians let nobody go in. I was the first one. And so I talked to the KGB officers that monitored Oswald. I talked to the KGB agents that befriended him. I found Oswald left audio recordings in Russia. I found those. I found photographs. I found his wife's family. And I actually put Marina Oswald together with her uncles for the first time with her family since
Oh,
the
wow.
assassination, because they were cut off. Right, the moment the assassination happened, the Russians didn't want to talk about Oswald being in Russia,
Yeah.
and so her letters, she couldn't write home anymore, and so I ended up talking with Marina about her husband, and of course I asked her the question. Right, and I will never forget what Marina said to me, because it works for all the serial killer wives as well. When I asked her what she knew, she says to me, the wife is always the last to know,
Yeah,
in
that's
a
for
thick
sure.
Russian accent.
Wow.
The wife is always the last to know.
It's funny, like I was looking, of course, your last name is very Slavic, right? And
Right,
mine
Russian.
is very Polish, without the Y.
Right, right.
And I am the least Polish looking Pole ever. Like, because I'm also half Filipino. So I'm half Filipino, a quarter German, and a
Oh
quarter
man, that's a
Polish.
deadly combination.
So I get the nice the olive tone, and it actually helps me because I can fit in just about anywhere.
Right.
I spent some time down in South America, and and everybody thought that I was of that. When I go to like Italy and I'm around a bunch of Italians, I look Italian if I slick my hair
Yeah,
back.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I could fit in just about everywhere.
Yeah,
It's a good skill to have.
yeah,
But yeah, I'd be interested. I've been trying to get a couple conspiracy theorists on here for the
yeah.
whole Oswald thing, because now, especially since they're now releasing more of the reports that we have here, the stuff that was and now
From
they're
the
saying,
JFK files you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're saying that that they believe that there were two gunmen at least now, and so I'm interested to see. I love it, but that's what they
My
released.
grandmother could make that shot. It's like 72 yards or something, or 80 yards. Are you kidding me? Yeah, it was the easy, and he's propped up. Marina told me that Oswald would, every day after work, when they were living together in New Orleans, he would dry fire his rifle. He would sit there in the living room and just dry firing that rifle. And every weekend they would go out on the levee, and he used to practice with that rifle.
Mhm.
Right? And when you think of the timing, the three shot, the magic bullet, and when you look at the actual magic bullet, you see how distorted and busted up that bullet is.
Yeah,
If you look at it this way, it looks like the pristine bullet. But when you look at it like this, it's flattened completely. And none of that, I was so pissed off when I came back from Russia with the conspiracy literature, with them all, because here they were taking evidence and trying to fit it to their theory rather than taking the evidence and building a theory on it. And so they would leave things out. That pristine bullet, I used to ask, like, how's it possible? Like, the bullet is in such good condition. And then when I look at the photographs from the National Archives of that bullet, and you look at that picture that nobody ever shows, right? You see that the bullet actually is distorted, it's damaged, it's flattened out, right? Looking at it on laterally. I still have, these things. I still have these things, right? I love these books. I love the presentation. I love the how they're done, right? But total fiction, right? It's crazy. And the best book is Norman Mailer's book,
which I have here.
Yeah, that's
I have it.
Norman Mailer used a lot of my material, Larry, because I did the project. I did it with the Russians, and then the Russians sold my stuff right to Larry Schiller, who was producing Norman Mailer. Right, Norman Mailer. What a concept! Huh? You're a writer, but you got a producer working for you, and there's a guy like Larry Schiller. So Larry Schiller bought out all the transcripts of the interviews I shot about maybe a year before Norman Mailer showed up there. Now, wow. Norman Mailer rented Oswald's former apartment in Minsk, and he lived in that apartment, so he really got into Oswald's head. And of course, I realized what I am as a writer and what Norman Mailer is as a writer, because we both had the same material, we both had the same access to people, same story, right? And as a writer, I'm an insect compared to what Norman Mailer did with that. I go, this is why Norman, I'm reading his book. I'm going, this is why Norman Mailer is Norman Mailer, and I'm Peter Vronsky, and why he's, two other people have written. There was another book, Savodnik wrote about the interloper, about Oswald. Yeah. And he kind of followed in Norman Mailer's footsteps and interviewed me and some of the people that I had interviewed. And I don't remember what Savodnik's conclusion was, but Norman Mailer's conclusion is basically the same one I came back with is Oswald, damn, the guy did it, for crying out loud. It was him, and it was him all by himself. Oswald did not play nice with others. He was a loner. He really was a loner. He wasn't going to be part of any conspiracy, and Russians told me that he loved Kennedy. It was kind of like a Chapman, John Lennon kind of situation, where Oswald realizes, I think, when he comes back to the U.S., he realizes that Kennedy is a killer, right? And he's talking to Marina. He keeps asking Marina, shouldn't somebody have shot Hitler? If somebody killed Hitler, right, the world would have been a better place.
Yeah.
And I think he's thinking of Kennedy.
So it's interesting. Have you ever there's a movie and a book as well. But the Stephen King wrote that book, 1963, which is very interesting. Yes. Going with a little bit of revisionist history, going back there and investigating that whole thing. I think the movie was brilliant. I thought they did a great job with that. I have the book. I'm a huge King fan.
Me too.
And so what's really funny about that, and I haven't really mentioned this to a bunch of people, I've become I talked to Richard Chismar, and Chismar writes with King a bunch. And so they wrote the Gwendy trilogy together. They've written a couple short stories together. Chismar owns Cemetery Dance Publishing. And so he's got his own series of books. He wrote Chasing the Boogeyman and then Becoming the Boogeyman. He's got a new book out called Memorials. I have all of those. But I sent, he's really into true crime. So I sent Chismar a copy of my book, and he's really excited. He's reading it right now. So I'm like, man, it's like, if you like it, if you don't like it, just throw it away. If you like it, I'll send you another copy and you can forward that off to Mr. King. That'd be great. But, just to think that an author that has written 80 or some odd books, and 30 of those have been bestsellers, a fiction author out there in the horror genre like actually has held a copy of my book would be the apex of anything.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But yeah, so I would be really interested. I'm trying to think. I've got a buddy of mine that's done some stuff, and my Mary is going to be really excited to hear about, because she feels like she is something of an authority on the Kennedy assassination herself. Yeah, and she'll be excited to hear your viewpoint. We will end up on the live having a quite the discussion about Lee Harvey Oswald and all of that, because it is one of those things that is iconic when you look at assassinations.
Hang on a second. Hang on, I got to show you this. Keep talking.
Yeah, but this is one of the big, incredible international assassinations. You have that. You got Lincoln, right? The Lincoln assassination, that are just so have shaped our history and what we believe. Oh wow, is that the original?
That's the original found in Russia.
Wow,
with
wild.
On the back, in Marina's hand, an inscription.
Wow.
Right? Exactly the same as on that backyard photo where he's holding the rifle. There's an inscription that she writes. Same handwriting.
Wow.
Right? It's Marina. Those pictures are real. It's him with that rifle. They're not fake. And I found this in Russia. Right?
That's incredible.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't
it?
Wow.
Unbelievable. I'll show you this. I have this. This is I bought this not too long ago. Now we're doing show and tell.
Yeah.
That is the daily news of Jack Ruby shooting Lee Harvey Oswald
Sunday morning.
Morning. Yeah. So I picked that up. I was at a show not too long ago and somebody had it there for sale. And I knew that I was going to be writing about the Kennedy assassination at some point. And I was going to be doing the way that the book is structured. I do a brief little history. I do 3 myths and a legend about each subject. And so I knew that I was going to be doing that. And I was like, dude, I got to have that part of my collection. Just so that I can have some inspiration to look at that when I'm working on it. And I'm excited to dig into that. So I will for sure be picking your brain when the time comes. And we'll talk for sure. Cool, man. Well, I know that you have a ton of stuff coming up in the future. You got any new books or anything that's getting ready to come out?
Right now, this has been the challenge. I have the first manuscript. Finally, I've written it. It's 1,000 pages, right? So I'm having this discussion with my publisher. I don't have an ending yet, because in what is it right now? It's near 12:30. So in 90 minutes, Cottingham is going to be calling me. Right? I talk to him every day.
Wow.
there are all these cases underway, and I don't know what the ending to my book is. And so this has become really essentially, these Cottingham murders have become my life. I'm essentially not doing anything else. I'm not working on anything else other than I still teach at my university. But other than that, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not making appearances. I'm not writing other books. We got a television series in development, but again, there's no ending. I don't know what the ending is, and of course, we never talked about this, but Jennifer, who was the daughter of one of the torso victims who got me into this because she wanted to find her mother's severed head, and was talking to Cottingham and introduced me to Cottingham. She passed away in the middle of all this in 2023. And so now I've been carrying, these cases that essentially Jennifer and I identified. We identified approximately 23 cases, 25 cases. 10 have been closed. The others are still hanging out there. Some are being investigated. Some are not. I have that website. Just let me give you the URL.
I think he pressed the wrong button. So hopefully Peter will pop back in here in just a second. I think he closed the window. But yeah, this has been an incredible episode. Being able to talk to him just about the Cottingham case and everything that's going on there. I love the stuff about Lee Harvey Oswald and the Kennedy assassination. I think that is fascinating, and I think at some point we've got to circle back around and just talk about that, because I've got a couple people in mind to bring on to talk about the conspiracy theories around the Kennedy assassination, and then I would love to do another episode with Peter discussing what he found when he went there for all of that. There we go. I told him, I was like, he must have closed the entire window.
It looks like it. I must have. Yeah.
I've done that a million times. I'm like, he'll be back in a second.
I'm back.
So I'll be really excited to see some of that. When you talk to Rich, tell him I said hello. Tell him I used my dad as a imposter one time for him.
Oh yeah, I will.
So you mentioned that before, and it's interesting. I'm kind of on the same path, because I've only ever spoken to one killer. And I know I have a lot of friends that have, that's all they do. They write different killers, and they talk to them, and they do shows about it. And I have only done that with one. I talked to, a matter of fact, I just heard from him yesterday, and his birthday is tomorrow, as a matter of fact. But I talked to pretty regularly to Dennis Rader, and Dennis sent me a message yesterday and was like, "Hey, I'm going to be 80 in a couple days." And because I asked him, I said, "Hey, you were supposed to send me a letter. I haven't gotten anything. Where the hell's it at, Dennis?" And he said, "Yeah." He was like, "I was working on it." And he said, "I got moved and some things got moved around." He was like, "I'll get it out to you in the next week." I was like, "Great. Make sure you do that." But yeah, he'll be 80 tomorrow.
It's Rader. I heard that Dennis Rader had my book when he was arrested.
Really?
In his library, yeah. And I wrote to him asking him about that. He never replied. Ask him for me.
Yeah, I'll ask him.
Talk to him. Yeah. My book came out in like October or November of 2004. And so 3 months later, he's arrested. And apparently he already had my book in his library, and it was all highlighted and sticky taped and stuff. And I always wondered about that.
Was that Sons of Cain?
No, that was the first one, The Method and Madness of Monsters.
Okay.
Yeah. So he would have run out and gotten it, right away. And he's in
Well,
it. He's in the book. I describe him as kind of making a comeback because that's exactly what happened. He made that comeback. I describe it in my book, but of course he's not identified yet. He's only known
yeah.
as the BTK.
So he is the last chapter in my first volume, and so there's a girl that ended up going when he was arrested, and his family disowned him. After several years, she ended up getting in touch with him and would visit him every week in prison, and she would do face-to-face visits and everything. And so she got really, really close with Dennis. And so John Borowski actually introduced me to her, and we were at a convention together. She was there to see John, and we ended up on the same panel together. And so we got to be pretty good friends, and she ended up introducing me to Dennis. And so then me and Dennis started corresponding and talking, and there were a lot of different things that I asked him for the book. And I was like, hey, what are your thoughts about this? And he gave me some interesting little tidbits. And then he wanted me to cover, because I asked him, I said, well, what do you want me to cover as far as, the legend of Dennis Rader? And he said, what you could cover is, they've always tried to link me to the Zodiac killer. The FBI has interviewed me 4 separate times about that I might have been the Zodiac. And so he never did give me any answer, but I did go back and I investigated that. And it's not true. He was not the Zodiac, and he kind of laughs about it because Dennis is pretty narcissistic. And anytime you can attribute something to him, and like one of the messages he sent me just recently, he got back in the news because they were saying that he kidnapped and killed that girl from Oklahoma. And then there was another girl that they were investigating. And he messaged me and he said, I had nothing to do with either one of those. He said, and just look, they caught the guy that did the one. And they did. They just arrested somebody in one of those 2 cases and proved through the DNA that it was him. So, it was interesting. And of course, Dennis is one of those guys. If he did it, he's going to tell you that he did it because he has no problem being upfront and honest about those things. And there's another lady out there. She's written a book and has done a podcast. And I'd be interested to talk to her because I watched it. Buddy of mine, oddly enough, is also in Canada. Cryptics, he's got a podcast. But I've been on his podcast several times for the Delphi murders. And then we talked about Dennis. But he turned me on to this one lady that believes that Dennis was a copycat, that he did not commit the first several murders and only committed the later ones. And that he was actually copying the real BTK. And so I would be interested to understand that better because, I mean, she described it in her podcast, but I'd be interested to talk to her and see because I disagree. But, I think it'd be interesting at some point. I'm gonna let Dennis. I'd be interested to get his take on that. I think he would be very, very offended that somebody said that he didn't do it. He would not be happy about that. Like, what the hell you mean? So
professional pride,
Yeah. So I'd be interested to hear his take on that. But I want to get all the facts before I share that with him. I'm sure he's already heard it a million times, but yeah. So cool, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And
thanks for having me on. It's great talking to you. And we went to a whole bunch of non-serial killer areas too.
Yeah, that's okay. So, on this podcast, one of the things that I really try to do is I often like to talk about the alternative theories of things, and not so much necessary conspiracy, but there's a lot of things out there. Like I interviewed John Wesley Anderson, and with the John Benet Ramsey case, and so he believes, just like Lou Smits, that it was not the family and that it was an intruder, and has a lot of evidence to back that up. And so there are a lot of people that want to blame the family and the Ramsey family. And I think that the evidence doesn't really support that. After really looking at it and looking at all the evidence, I believed that it was the brother for a long time. And after really digging into it with John, he changed my mind. And, and I think that it's important that some of those views get out there that are not commonly talked about,
Right.
because there is a whole nother side to a lot of these stories that, you know, the media goes and runs with it, and they say this is it and this is what happened, and they don't really know that. It's just sensationalized. And so really taking that and being able to highlight this other side of things, I think has a lot of weight and is very interesting, even if it's not for anybody else other than just me, because I think it's fascinating. I've always wanted to understand things in its totality. I never want to listen to other people and what they think. I want to take in all of the information and then make up my own mind.
Right.
And
Right. Yeah.
I think that that is the sign of any good researcher. And there are a lot of people out there that are not good researchers.
Yeah, you sometimes find things that you never thought you'd find, and sometimes you find things you wish you didn't find. That just blows a hole through your theory, right?
Yep.
Like the last 2 years, or in my case with Oswald, I was so disappointed that Oswald. I was convinced I was going to find evidence that Oswald was sent to Russia as a decoy by naval intelligence. I thought there was a connection between his departure from the Marines, how easily he was let go from active service, and then the next day he goes to Russia. I thought, there's got to be somebody behind him.
Yeah.
And then I discovered, what I discovered, and I was shocked too, just how young he was. I mean, he was 19 years old, right? So, when he went to Russia. So it of course blew out what was at that time for me a lifetime of study. But you got to let these things go sometimes. If you're
Yeah.
wrong, you're wrong. All right. If the evidence takes you somewhere else, go where the evidence takes you, not where your theory takes you.
Absolutely. So I almost don't want to. I almost don't want to bring this up now because we're coming towards the end.
Here we go. Here's another 15 minutes.
So, what do you think about Cuba?
About Cuba?
Yeah, and Oswald going there.
Oswald wanted to go to Cuba. He certainly wanted to go to Cuba when he was in the Marines. He wanted to join Castro. We know that. He admired Castro. A lot of people. I mean, a lot of Americans did. I mean, Oswald admired Castro before Oswald knew that Castro was a communist. Before all of us, nobody knew Castro was a communist. I mean, when you look at Castro's visits to New York in 1960, he's hailed as this great hero by Americans, and there are all these socialites from the Upper East Side visiting him in the Teresa Hotel in Harlem, and we love Castro. Until he starts, screwing around with the sugar fields, with our sugar supply and oil supply, right?
Yeah.
And so things go bad. So I suspect Oswald was in contact with Cuban exiles in New Orleans after he took a shot. Now, you see, I found audio tapes in Russia where Oswald fantasizes about shooting a general in command of NATO forces.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now that's 1960. He's recording these audio tapes, right? He's recording these audio tapes with a KGB agent who's sent to monitor him and watch him. And so he tells him that he wants to learn English in the way Oswald speaks it. And so they record hours and hours of practice audio so the guy can study Oswald's accent.
Interesting.
And he still has those recordings. So he played me those recordings. And in those recordings, Oswald is reading from Hemingway, The Killers. And then at one point, they have a press conference, a fake press conference. And Oswald, the role he takes on is an assassin who had just shot the general in charge of NATO in Europe. And of course, this is being recorded right at the moment, right, that Kennedy is firing the NATO commander for being too right-wing. And of course, why is Oswald in New Orleans? Because he just took a shot at General Walker, right, in Dallas.
Wow.
And I found his wife wrote letters home still, because this is, before the assassination. And she's describing how they have to move to New Orleans because he's going to have better luck in New Orleans. It was where, his childhood was, and they're moving back to New Orleans. She describes everything the way she testified later to the Warren Commission. And people, were accusing of Marina Oswald of kind of being under the influence and being forced to lie to the Warren Commission about Oswald. But it's all in her letters, the same thing she told the Warren Commission. I found it in the letters she wrote 2 years before the assassination to her aunt and uncle back in Russia. So I got those letters. Right? So I think that he already in Russia was of that mind. And we often forget about Oswald's April attempt on General Walker. It's like for us, Oswald begins with the day of the assassination, but he took a shot at at General Walker, just like he fantasized he was going to do. Yeah. So he ends up in New Orleans, and there's no question he's in contact with the Cuban community there, because he already had an interest in Cuba from the pre-revolutionary days when he was a Marine. He was talking to I think he was a Cuban fellow Marine, forgot his name, that how the two of them were going to quit the Marines and go join Castro and fight in Cuba. So he was interested in Cuba, and I think he heard from the exiles what happened at the Bay of Pigs. And about Kennedy, he maybe Oswald got wind of the assassination attempts on Castro, maybe, and sort of what the CIA was doing and how they were recruiting, and there's these questions about one of Oswald's uncles being connected to a mob family in New Orleans. So certainly his activity in New Orleans is really at question. And David Ferry, that connection, and how did that the addresses, so all those things led me to kind of suggest that Oswald became disillusioned with Kennedy in a way that happened with Mark Chapman. That Kennedy is a phony, JFK is a phony, because all the Russians were telling me, oh no, Oswald could never have shot Kennedy. He loved Kennedy. Oh yeah, tell me about Oswald's love for Kennedy. I never heard about that, right? Yeah. And so they tell me that Kennedy's elected when Oswald is living in Russia. And of course, all the Russians are asking Oswald, what do you think of Kennedy? What do you think of the new president? And Oswald, of course, is just extolling how great Kennedy's going to be. And it's turned out that Kennedy really is, it was no Camelot, that Hershey book, The Dark Side of Camelot. So, we realized that you want a real killer, you want a real serial killer, take a look at JFK. You want a missionary serial killer who, how many, people he had assassinated and murdered. So,
it is, it's a fascinating subject. And I think we are going to have to, at some point, we'll have another episode and we'll just
Yes.
talk about that.
Yeah, Lee
I'm in.
Harvey Oswald episode, JFK,
Yeah, for
definitely.
sure.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much. I've monopolized a bunch of your time today. I know you have, you got to go talk to Rich. So,
Yeah, shortly I'm back on the line. Yeah.
yeah, tell him, I got plenty of questions because he is an interesting anomaly. So I'll be excited to see when your work is finished and it comes out, and
Yeah.
we get to check it out.
God, please let me finish this because I've been 8 years. This is the 8th year now I'm on this, and it was supposed to be an 18-month project. And when I went to see him, I didn't know he was confessing.
Yeah.
I just, like I said, now it's now 19 murders, and when I started it was 6. So
Wow.
it's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And you are one of the few people that within our community that has really dug so deep and has been able to get those things and to connect the dots, and that is incredibly unique.
Thank you.
Really helping the families and the people that have been wondering for so long what happened to their family members, and that is it shows the power of this community and the good that we can do
Yeah. Yeah.
outside of the bullshit that comes with it, because sometimes there is so much sensationalism that happens,
Yes.
and it's a shame because everything that I've tried to do, I've been called a lot of different things, but the truth is always to highlight what's important here, and to get these things, because we never want to forget. And so often we got this movement where people just want to forget about the bad
Yeah.
things that have happened,
Yeah.
and that's not okay. It's a problem. You've got to remember history. You have to remember the players in history. It's important to know what happened and to not lose that. That doesn't mean that you glorify those people, but you have to remember these things because they leave a whole wake of other people that are affected by this, and
That's
those
right.
people are very important.
Generations of people. I mean, I'm one family I'm dealing with. They never knew the victim. They weren't even born. The victim is gone. The victim's brother is gone, but the family kind of grew up with this. The wife, her daughter, grew up with this murder that they weren't alive when it happened, but it's so much part of their life because trauma gets passed on generation to generation, and you have people who weren't there, but they're still living with this trauma of their parents or their husband, that passed away, that they suffered at the actual time of the murder, and so it is viral.
Yeah.
It people carry this, and it's almost like it gets into families' DNA. In that DNA, there's also the trauma of that murder.
Yeah.
And people look at, especially cops, look at a guy like you or a guy like me, and we're meddlers. We're never inside the blue wall. All right, we're meddlers, and it's a tough it's a tough it's a tough haul.
Then they always say the pen is mightier than the sword, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. And
it
now the
certainly be true.
podcast is mightier than the sword.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. That
yeah,
the yeah, that's a whole nother subject. But it has become the media of choice for many, many, many people. Podcasts have certainly grown a voice where the legacy media has fallen by the wayside and has jumped on their special interest. It is in the podcast where we can
yeah,
find
yeah,
the truth,
yeah.
and so it's a unique position to be in, to be able to speak about those things. So
Yes.
I love being part of that. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for bringing me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for taking time to talk, and I will definitely get with you soon.
Take care.
All right. We'll talk to you soon, Peter. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. What an incredible thing. Peter has been doing so much work out there and really helping the families that have been affected by, Richard Cottingham and the things that he's done. And he's really been able to get into his head and have real frank discussions with him, which is incredible to me. So thank you, Peter, for all that you do. Thank you guys for being here and checking it out. And this wraps up this special episode, being part of Podcast-thon. Make sure that you go. We're going to have a whole bunch of links. I'll put links to all of the stuff that Peter is doing, his books down below. But I'll also put the links to the Cold Case Foundation as well. So you guys, if you want to go and support them, we talked a ton about cold cases and how they get solved and the information, and all of that stuff takes money, right? The police departments, the families, they all need that capital to be able to do this stuff and to investigate these things, to run the DNA reports, to obtain the information, obtain the files and things that they need. And the Cold Case Foundation is there to help support that and to help facilitate that. So by all means, check them out. Make sure that you give to them and help them get to where they need to be. Like I said, I'll have the link. And then if you want to go to Podcast-thon, right? Go there. It's podcasthon.org. So like podcast, HON, and .org. And it will get you there, and you can check out every other podcast on there. I think right now to date, there's like 1,600 podcasts that are participating in this event. Go and check it out. Find some new podcasts that you maybe have never heard of and want to see and want to engage with. Check them out. Check out what they're doing. There's not just true crime podcasts on there, but podcasts of all kinds. So check it out. See what you got. And thank you again for those new viewers that are on here checking me out, because you went there and checked out all the stuff that they have going on. Thank you for being here. Make sure you like and subscribe and share and get this out there to everybody. We appreciate you guys, and I will see you next week for our live recap episode. Next Tuesday, we'll be talking about all the things here, and we have so much more in store for you coming in the near future. Talk to y'all soon.